Iraq, a place that is known as Mesopotamia, has been destroyed by a cataclysm. What terrible thing just happened? How strong is the storm? Why invade Iraq? Is that a sign from heaven? In this episode, I will explain in more detail. Smash that thumbs up button for me, leave me a comment down below, and share this video with your friends. And let's get started. First, let's have an overview of Iraq. Iraq is a country in southwestern Asia, a region whose extensive alluvial plains gave rise to some of the world's earliest civilizations, including those of Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria. This wealthy region, comprising much of what is called the Fertile Crescent, later became a valuable part of larger imperial polities, including sundry Persian, Greek, and Roman dynasties. After the 7th century, it became a central and integral part of the Islamic world. Today, we will talk about the Najaf region. Let's take a look at the climate of Najaf. The average temperature in Najaf on a typical day ranges from a high of 68 degrees Fahrenheit or 20 degrees to a low of 42 degrees Fahrenheit or 6 degrees Celsius. Some people would describe the weather as quite cool with a light breeze. In Najaf in February, on an average day, there is an 11% chance of rain, and on an average day of rain or snow, we received 6.7 mm of rain. To put it more commonly, some people would describe it as light rain. Here again, storms and floods occur. This is very unusual, right? Heavy rain has hit the Iraqi city of Najaf after one of the driest years in decades. Heavy rainfall has swept across the country. Heavy rain overnight caused flash floods in Najaf starting at 4 a.m. The incident caused widespread damage to houses, infrastructure, vehicles, and loss of life. Muddy water flooded homes in northern and eastern Najaf. Flash floods occurred in the early hours of the morning, forcing people to leave their homes. Streets turned into streams of water due to blockaded residential areas built on drainage wadis for the area, and even some ice wadis through the heavily flooded city. More than 1,250 families suffered heavy material damage and vehicles were swept away, blocking the floodwaters. Main Road. 3 women from the same family drowned when their home was covered by about 2 meters of floodwater. Speaking of which, do we still remember the story of Noah's flood? The flood scriptures from Genesis 6:11 to 9:19 focus on Noah's heroic role. Noah was honored as a patriarch because of his sinless piety, and God chose him to survive after the flood destroyed all life except his family. Noah, a righteous man, found favor in the sight of the Lord, and God warned him of the impending disaster and promised to save him and his family. Noah was instructed to build an ark and collect samples of all the animals, thereby ensuring survival after the flood. According to this story, the entire modern human race is considered the descendants of Noah's 3 sons and their wives. Will history repeat itself? The storm brings gusts of wind, heavy rain, and sometimes even lightning and tornadoes, making the air dark and heavy. The storm's rolling winds cause trees to fall, damage property, and endanger human life. The aftermath of storms can eliminate homes, power supplies, and public transportation. People living in Najaf faced the threat of death and had to quickly find ways to protect themselves and their families from the power of the storm. This is a reminder that, despite the power of nature, humans are still very weak and need to protect themselves against these terrifying challenges. The religious significance of the flood is conveyed after Noah's heroic survival. He then built an altar to offer burnt offerings to God, who then bound himself to a pact never to curse the earth because of humans again. God then placed a rainbow in the sky as a visible guarantee of his promise in this covenant. God also renewed his commands at creation, but with 2 changes. Man could now kill animals and eat meat, and murder would be punished by men. And God flooded the world. In the pitch-black darkness, the storm umbrella in Najaf flashed with lightning, illuminating the night sky. The sound of thunder echoed throughout the space, shaking the ground beneath our feet. Strong winds swept through every corner of the city, hitting every object within reach. The rain fell like fierce waves, making everything wet. Thunder echoes in the air like divine warnings, reminding people of the uncontrollable power of nature. Before this fierce storm, people must be vigilant and find ways to protect themselves from the destructive power of nature. Why does God flood the world? Even before the flood story begins, we learn that the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth and that the thoughts of his heart were only evil. Genesis 6:5. And it hurt God's heart. Genesis 6:6. Therefore, God sent the flood as a judgment, an obstacle to humanity's evil stemming from the sorrow in the heart. Genesis 6:5-6. Genesis describes the flood as the destruction of the world. The earth sank again into the waters of chaos that God had cleared on page 1 of the Bible. Genesis 1:6-10. In the ark, God brought Noah's family through the flood unharmed to start anew in a sinless world again. It's a new beginning and a chance for a different ending. If you're like us, you might say, but no matter how you tell the story, God still wiped out all of humanity except for one family. How did the flood reflect God's goodness when he brought such disaster upon the earth? Let us make 3 observations from the context of the story. Just have mercy. The story of the flood is the story of God performing a merciful act to restrain the increasing evil of mankind. Genesis tells us that God saw that every thought of the heart of man was evil. Genesis 6:5. In the Bible, context means everything. The book of Genesis anchors the meaning of the flood in the context of God's intervention to prevent humanity's plunge into evil. Grief, not revenge. God is not happy when there are floods. Rather, Genesis emphasizes how the evil caused by the fall caused him sorrow and grief. God created the earth as a place where humans could flourish, but instead they turned it into a theater of violence and disaster. Genesis 4:8, 4:23, 6, 1, 7. And God's heart was broken. Curious climax. Covenant. Later, when the prophet Isaiah remembered Noah, Isaiah 54:9, he did not think of the flood, but of the covenant that God made with Noah afterward. In that covenant, God promised that nothing like this would ever happen again. This points to the main meaning of the story. The flood is about God's mercy and commitment to the goodness of what he has done. New beginning. So what have we learned so far? The flood was not an act of wanton destruction by a capricious God. God is working to restore goodness to his creation. God preserved a family through the flood and raised Noah as the new Adam, placed once again in the garden of high mountain paradise with a mission to be fruitful and multiply. The reason for the flood is given in Genesis 6:5-7. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. The passage uses anthropomorphic language. It does not mean that God was met with unforeseen circumstances that caused him to think he had made a mistake by creating mankind. Rather, it expresses God's deep sadness over the wickedness of mankind. The purpose of the flood was to wipe out the wickedness, which included widespread violence according to Genesis 6:11, by wiping out the wicked people, which was everybody except Noah and his family. Later on, we find that even Noah and his family had their problems. Genesis 9:20-24, for even the best of us are still sinners. People today are still wicked, but God promised that he would never again destroy the world by a flood, and he gave the rainbow in the sky as a reminder of his promise. Genesis 9:8-16. This promise does not mean that God overlooks sin. One day he will destroy the earth by fire. Peter explains, "The heavens existed long ago, and the earth was formed out of water and through water by the word of God, and that by means of these, the world that then existed was deluged with water and perished. But by the same word, the heavens and earth that now exist are stored up for fire, being kept until the day of judgment and destruction of the ungodly." 2 Peter 3, 5, 7. And he adds that the day of the Lord will come like a thief, and then the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the heavenly bodies will be burned up and dissolved. 2 Peter 3:10. The second coming of Jesus. It is important to distinguish the second coming of Christ from the rapture of the church. These are two distinct events. The joy of the church occurs when Jesus calls his followers to come to him. The rapture event is recorded in 1 Thessalonians 4:13-18 and 1 Corinthians 15:50-54. The rapture of the church occurs before the 7-year Great Tribulation. The second coming of Christ is different from the rapture because in Jesus' second coming, he will literally touch down on the Mount of Olives, Zechariah 14:3-4. One difference between the second coming and the rapture of the church is that the second coming occurs at the end of the 7-year tribulation period when the Lord returns. The second coming of Christ will be completely different from the first coming of Jesus to earth. Peter tells us what this final judgment means for us. Since all these things are thus to be dissolved, what sort of people ought you to be in lives of holiness and godliness, waiting for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be set on fire and dissolved, and the heavenly bodies will melt as they burn? But according to his promise, we are waiting for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. 2 Peter 2:11-13. After the destruction of the flood, the world was not made perfect, and mankind continued in rebellion. After the destruction by fire, the new heavens and earth will be created, and the world will be characterized by righteousness. The only ones who escaped the flood were those who got on board the ark. Likewise, the only ones who will escape the coming judgment are those who take refuge in Christ. There is a great divide between two major systems of belief on the biblical flood in the days of Noah. There are those who say it is either a purely mythological event or else possibly a local or regional flood. Then there are those who accept the biblical record of the flood as a literal record of a tremendous cataclysm involving not only a worldwide deluge, but also great tectonic upheavals and volcanic outpourings that completely changed the crust of the earth and its topography in the days of Noah. Here are a few of the many biblical reasons for believing in the global flood. Jesus Christ believed the Old Testament record of the worldwide flood. Speaking of the antediluvian population, he said, "The flood came and took them all away." Matthew 24:39. Evolutionary anthropologists are all convinced that people had spread over the entire earth by the time assigned to Noah in biblical chronology, so an anthropologically universal flood would clearly have required a geographically worldwide flood. The Apostle Peter believed in a worldwide hydraulic cataclysm, whereby the world, Greek cosmos, that then was, being overflowed, Greek katakluzo, with water, perished. 2 Peter 3:6. The world was defined in the previous verse as the heavens and the earth. Peter also said that God spared not the old world, but saved Noah, bringing in the flood, Greek kataklusmos, upon the world of the ungodly. 2 Peter 2:5. The Old Testament record of the flood, which both Christ and Peter accepted as real history, clearly teaches a global flood. For example, the record emphasizes that all the high hills that were under the whole heaven and the mountains were covered, Genesis 7:19-20, with the waters of the flood. Since all flesh died that moved upon the earth, all that was in the dry land, Genesis 7:21-22, Noah and his sons had to build a huge ark to preserve animal life for the post-diluvian world, an ark that can easily be shown to have had more than ample capacity to carry at least 2 of every known species of land animal. Marine animals were not involved, of course. Such an ark was absurdly unnecessary for anything but a global flood. God promised that never shall there any more be a flood to destroy the earth, Genesis 9:11. And he has kept his word for over 4,000 years if the flood indeed was global. Those Christians who say it was a local flood, however, are in effect accusing God of lying, for there are many devastating local floods every year. However, a flood of the proportions described in Genesis would have resulted in vast amounts of erosion and redepositing of sediments, fossilization of plants and animals, volcanism, and redistribution of radioisotopes. If one denies the global flood as a historic event, he might use the Grand Canyon Colorado River system to prove great ages, when, in reality, the canyon demonstrates flooding processes with rates, scales, and intensities eclipsing anything observed today. Thus, the misunderstood evidence of old ages is actually strong evidence for the flood. In reality, the global flood and recent creation doctrines are synonymous concepts, forcing Dr. Ross and others to twist Scripture, making it say something it clearly does not. To document that the Bible specifically teaches the global flood should be sufficient to convince a true believer in the authority of the Bible. Biblical arguments for a global flood. Keep in mind that local flood old earth advocates postulate the earth before the flood as essentially identical to today's earth. The depth and duration of the flood. The flood waters covered the mountains to a depth of at least the draft of Noah's Ark, Genesis 7:19-20. Today's mountains in the Ararat region include Mount Ararat, which rises to 17,000 feet in elevation. The flood lasted for a year, peaking 150 days after it started, 7/11, 8, 3, 4. Then it began to abate. A year-long mountain-covering flood is not a local flood. The physical causes for the flood. The Bible explains that the breaking open of all the fountains of the great deep and the windows of heaven, 7:11, were the primary causes. The deep is the ocean. Thus, the great deep could hardly be the cause of a limited local flood. The windows seem to refer to the waters above the atmospheric firmament. 1:7. These were global causes, producing a global effect. The need for an ark. Noah was given many years of warning, long enough to walk anywhere on Earth. The animals also would have lived globally, and so could have migrated anywhere. There was no need for an ark if the flood was local. The ark's size, big enough to carry 2 or 7 for some, of each land-dwelling, air-breathing animal, testifies for a global flood. Building such a huge ship for a local flood for which there was ample warning would be ludicrous. Destruction of all mankind. The flood's primary purpose was to destroy sinful mankind. While the Earth's pre-flood population is not given, reasonable assumptions based on biblical data for average family size, lifespans, and age of parent at time of firstborn yield a population far in excess of the maximum Mesopotamian population. The Earth was filled with violence, 6:11-13, and while this may have included animal violence, it certainly included human violence. An Earth filled with violence would necessitate an Earth filled with people, only a global flood to accomplish its primary purpose. Not only were violent inhabitants under condemnation, the Earth itself was to be destroyed, 6:13. The word for Earth was the same word as used in the creation account, 1:1. Surely it means the planet, not just a local area. Promise of no more floods. At the end of the flood, God promised that there would never again be such a flood, 9:15. But there have been many floods, even regional floods, especially in Mesopotamia, since Noah's day. If this was merely a local flood, then God broke his promise, and the Rainbow Covenant means nothing. The testimony of Jesus Christ. Christ compared the days immediately prior to his second coming to the days prior to the flood. He reminded us that the flood came and destroyed them all. Luke 17:27. The coming judgment will be similarly extensive. If the flood in Noah's day was local, people living outside the area survived, even though they too were sinners. This gives great hope to end-time sinners. Will they be able to escape the coming fiery judgment on sin? In Jesus' first coming, he was a gentle king riding a colt, Zechariah 9:9. At his second coming, Jesus will return as a mighty warrior king who will destroy his enemies. Jesus in his first coming was peaceful and gentle. However, at the second coming, Jesus will return with his army from heaven. This time, there will be no more meekness because Jesus will be a warrior wielding a two-edged sword, Revelation 1:16. The book of Revelation talks a lot about the second coming of Christ. Revelation 19:11-16 says, "I saw heaven open, and before me there was a white horse, whose rider's name was Faithful and True. With justice he judges and wages war. His eyes were like blazing fire, and on his head were many crowns. He has a name written on him that no one knows but himself. He wears a robe dipped in blood, and his name is the Word of God. The armies of heaven followed him, riding on white horses and clothed in fine linen, white and clean. From his mouth comes a sharp sword to destroy the nations. He will rule them with an iron scepter. He treads the winepress of the wrath of Almighty God. On his garment and on his thigh is written this name, King of Kings and Lord of Lords." This passage tells us that Jesus will return in judgment. He will judge with justice and truth. The Lord will rule over all nations with an iron scepter. As Revelation 19:11-16 reveals to us, the Lord will return in omnipotence, power, and majesty. No one should underestimate the great power and vengeance of God, the time of the second coming. As scheduled, the time of the second coming will not come until the end of the 7-year Great Tribulation, which follows the rapture of the church. The second coming of Jesus occurs during the Battle of Armageddon. The Battle of Armageddon is a series of battles that occur at the end of the Great Tribulation period, Revelation 19:11-20. In this final battle, Jesus defeats all his enemies before establishing his 1,000-year reign over the Millennial Kingdom. After the second coming of the Lord, he will reign as king. Jesus will truly walk among the people, and he will be the perfect king. Although Jesus will literally walk among the people, many will reject him and follow Satan. At the end of Christ's 1,000-year reign, Satan will be released for a short time to test the nations. Revelation 20:7-10. Many people will follow Satan instead of placing their faith in Christ. After the millennial reign of Christ, the great white throne judgment will take place. Revelation 20:11-15. After the second coming of the Lord, he will reign as king. Jesus will truly walk among the people, and he will be the perfect king. Although Jesus will literally walk among the people, many will reject him and follow Satan. At the end of Christ's 1,000-year reign, Satan will be released for a short time to test the nations. Revelation 20:7-10. Many people will follow Satan instead of placing their faith in Christ. After the millennial reign of Christ, the great white throne judgment will take place. Revelation 20:11-15. In the great white throne judgment, God will judge those who do not put faith in him. He will resurrect all unbelievers, and they will be thrown into the lake of fire along with Satan, the Antichrist, and the false prophet. How to be ready for the second coming. The second coming of the Lord will occur at the end of the Great Tribulation. We can be ready for the second coming of Christ by ensuring that we have placed our trust in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. If we have done this, then we are ready for the second coming of Jesus. We can also be prepared by living our lives for the Lord by actively reading the Bible, praying, and participating in fellowship with other believers. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.